everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be diving into the world of fear play, and this should be a really interesting topic because unlike a lot of the other things I cover here on my channel, this is a very mental aspect of BDSM. And usually with BDSM, we tend to, I think, over focus on the more physical side of things. We think of kink as being all about the floggers and the handcuffs and the paddles, but it doesn't actually have to be that way. You can have a delightful, wonderful scene while you're using the mind as your primary tool. So with that being said, let's talk about fear play. And I initially want to start by just covering what exactly fear play is. And the definition is somewhat obvious from just the word fear play, but to make things very clear, when I talk about fear play, I am referring to a form of emotional sadomasochism where you intentionally provoke the emotion of fear to create the desired response and scene you want to have. And with fear play, I would say there are two main modes for engaging in it. You can have fear play where the main objective is to have very quick, acute fear, more like a jump scare, where the feeling of fear comes on very quickly and rapidly, but it also goes away quite quickly as well. Now, you can also have fear that's more of like a slow, creeping dread type of fear play where it very slowly builds up over the course of a scene, an evening, or perhaps even the entire relationship if you have a fear play based DS dynamic, for example. Now, I will say in a lot of people's definitions of fear play, they take a lot of pains to emphasize that fear play is always this really extreme form of edge play. That is a form of play where it carries a higher than average perceived level of risk, and it typically falls outside the boundaries of what most people would call safe, sane, and consensual. And I am going to buck the trend here a little bit. I think there are ways to do fear play that don't necessarily always make it edge play, but regardless, edge play is inherently subjective to begin with, and everyone's edge is going to be different. It's very individual, and so I can't really say for sure definitively one way or the other what fear play counts or doesn't count as being edge play, right? So for example, let's take the typical, stereotypical fear play scene. You know, have an interrogation set up, you're in some kind of plain, unfamiliar white room. It's very sterile. There's maybe some chafing handcuffs, maybe some kind of like fuzzy monitor in the background. It just like, it exudes creepiness. You know, there's blaring white lights, it's too hot, it's too cold, whatever. And you can do this scene from that point in a couple of different ways, or you can have a very hot, active scene where your partner is like hurling insults at you and accusations and like tripping you up with different questions like left, right, and center, and they're saying to do contradictory things you can't possibly be expected to do, and they yell and throw things and slam their fist on the table and try to scare you through very active physical things. You can also have a fear play scene with an interrogation that's much more cold and smooth in its approach. Maybe instead of coming on really strong initially, they have a nice smile, they bring you a cup of coffee or a Diet Coke, and they sit down and they just gently ask you some questions. You don't really think anything of it, you know, okay, this seems to be a little bit more friendly than I was expecting. All the while, they're slowly backing you into a corner with the questioning, and at that point, you sort of go, oh, this is not going in a good direction after all. What's gonna happen to me if I get caught in a lie that I don't even realize I'm telling? Or what if I try to tell the truth, but at the end they accuse me of lying anyway? And that can bring on a huge sense of dread and fear. I think regardless of which one of those two options you're going with, we can pretty fairly say that either one would be likely to constitute edge play for most people. I think that's where the stereotype of fear play always being about edge play probably comes from. But I want to get a little bit unconventional with fear play here. So to give a completely different example as a counterpoint, maybe let's say that you're daddy dom with a little and you guys want to play hide and seek over the weekend. You have like a big cabin or something you're renting out in the middle of the woods, and your little takes a turn hiding. First you find him right away, and then it's your turn to hide. And because you rented the cabin, you know all the little nooks and crannies, all the best places to hide. And then you disappear. You're gone for 20, 30 minutes. It's fun at first for the little, and they go, oh, this is so fun. But then after a while, starts to feel a little bit like, okay, daddy, where'd you go? Time to come out now. And by the time they pass you 3 times, you finally leap out from the closet and go, ah, and like say boo and try to scare them. And then they're scared at first and they start laughing. You scoop them up into a big hug and just smother them with kisses all over their forehead. And then the fear is gone as quickly as it came on. Now, would I say this constitutes edge play? Probably not. You can see within that example there is both the slower moving dread of like not being able to find daddy, but then also the very quick jump scare of jumping out from the closet. But even then, I think we can generally say that's like fairly lighthearted and wouldn't be edge play for most people. So what counts as edge play with fear is very subjective, and I'm happy to say that you don't have to be like some really out there edgy edge player, the biggest edge player who ever did BDSM, to be able to enjoy or start to explore fear play. One of the great things about the big ball of paradox that is BDSM is that you can do things that are both fun and scary at the same time. You don't have to go whole hog with it, and to be certain, you can do a lot of fear play that is very intense. It does get quite dark if you want to go in that direction, but it's not always for certain, and it's not necessarily the default experience. And fear play can be the main course of the scene. It can be the reason why you're playing, but as we just heard with that second example, it can also be an accent. It can be a seasoning to go along with the main component of a scene. You can use it like salt on watermelon to bring out the underlying sweetness. That balance of sweet and salty, canceling out the underlying bitterness, can really just make the sweeter parts of the scene feel that much sweeter. But just like a lot of people don't understand wanting to put salt on your watermelon, a lot of people also don't understand fear play. Like, okay, you want to feel scared during a scene? Like, why would you want to be afraid of your partner? Why would you want to feel terrified while playing? That's a total opposite of the emotional experience that I want to have, so what the heck is up with that? And I think it's good to talk about why people are into fear play, because yeah, it doesn't always make sense. And we actually have quite a lot of different theories out there about why so many people are drawn to fear, even in a vanilla capacity. For example, it's oftentimes been repeated that there is a link between arousal and fear. One theory going back to the 1970s states that arousal to a non-sexual stimulus, such as fear arousal, may be transferred into sexual excitation. This may also be paired with a misattribution of arousal, in which the person assumes that, rather than feeling fear, they become aroused due to sexual or romantic interest. Others point to a more neurobiologically focused model, where the shared connection point between fear and arousal is the release of dopamine. But regardless of whatever the true scientific connection is between fear and arousal, I think most of us have some experience with anecdotal evidence linking fear and arousal together. I, for myself, remember a very popular story from a couple of years ago where somebody reported that when they began to watch horror movies with their then platonic roommate, they soon afterwards started to develop feelings and ended up exploring kink together. I think for a lot of us, watching horror movies can bring us closer to a partner or make us feel excited. Dating apps have previously reported that users that mention enjoying horror movies seem to be more kinky on average, and also, just from pure anecdotal evidence, it does seem like when you have a horror movie Netflix and chill session, which I despise that phrase, but we are using it here. It seems to lead to a lot more chill afterwards for a lot of folks. And even with OkCupid, they reported way back in 2014 that whether or not a pair agreed on liking horror movies or not was an important indicator for the long-term success of a relationship. So clearly, fear is something big to consider when it comes to arousal and human interaction. So, we know that horror movies can make us feel all tingly inside, but what else can fear do for us? Number one, I think that fear can be something that people that are more drawn to intense sensations tend to seek out. People that are sensation seekers like to have extreme, intense experiences. It helps them feel alive, connected to their bodies, so on and so forth. And just like you have people that love skydiving and are roller coaster junkies or travel around the country to go to the most extreme haunted houses possible, there are people who experience and try to experience fear in their relationships as a way of getting that stimulus that they enjoy having so much. Feeling fear with a partner can also create an opportunity for a bonding experience. Having that scary stimulus followed up by having close connection and reassurance from a partner can be very impactful, especially when the person who is making you feel scared is also the one who comes to your rescue as your protector. Trust and vulnerability are also really, really big here. When you're able to explore and talk about your fears with a partner, that's a huge area of vulnerability. And then if you can play with and engage in those fears with a partner, have that trust and vulnerability respected, and then have it turn out okay afterwards, have it actually be a positive experience, that can be a huge boon for a relationship. And having that be respected, having that mental reinforcement of I can trust this person with some of the scariest things that I can think of in my mind, that's going to open you up to being more vulnerable again and again in the future, because you have that baseline reassurance of exploring this area with somebody being okay. And one of the primary elements of fear play we'll talk about more here in a moment is the fear of the unknown. And using the fear of the unknown during a scene can make somebody stay present in the moment because they don't know what's going to happen next or what's going on. They have to stay very mentally aware, literally sometimes stay on their toes to be able to figure out, okay, what the heck is going on here? And having that focus on just being in the moment, trying to figure out what is happening, what's going to happen next, that prevents you from having your mind wander or ruminate or focus on anxious thoughts. For a lot of people, it helps quiet their mind down and get into a better, happier headspace, paradoxically. And of course, as is very oftentimes the case, doing this kind of play can be very healing for people. If you experienced a very scary scenario in real life, it can be a very positive thing to explore that with a partner in a more controlled setting where you have control, you have the ability to say where it's going to go, how it's going to end. That can really help you assuage any leftover guilt or shame from that scenario, as well as be able to reestablish your feelings of power and autonomy, both in that particular scenario, but also with yourself as a person more broadly. So I'm not saying anyone should go out and just immediately start exploring all of their most horrible life experiences once again with a partner, but it is a key component that is worth pointing out that, yeah, a lot of people do find this experience to be healing for them. Within kink, we have scenes that we can have that play with certain scenarios that tend to provoke anxiety and fear. That would be things like medical play or blood, which a lot of people find uncomfortable. We can also use objects that people tend to find uncomfortable or make them feel afraid, things like needles or knives. We can also create scenarios where somebody doesn't have any control or it puts them in a no-win scenario. Something like predicament bondage, for example, can be an easy way to do this, where maybe you have somebody have to choose between two different uncomfortable positions, where with one, if they're up on their tiptoes, they have looser rope around them and it feels more comfortable, but also slowly over time, having to be on your tiptoes tends to wear you out and make you feel quite exhausted and make your calves sore. Whereas if you put your feet down and start to relax, that makes the rope become tighter, which in certain areas can become quite uncomfortable very quickly. But regardless of what types of toys or type of scene you want to use to help create the sensation of fear, I think there are some key things worth considering when it comes to how you are going to create that emotion of fear. And for me, the three big components I'd recommend very closely analyzing would be the unknown, creating blank space, as well as loss of control. Now with the unknown, this is like the classic horror movie tool, where not knowing what is happening, who somebody is, what their intentions are, etc., that all creates a feeling of fear because you have that uncertainty and oftentimes no way to really know exactly what's going on. Like for example, that scratching outside the window, that could just be a dry branch from a tree scraping up against the window, but it might also be a monster trying to claw their way into your room to have their way with you. Or maybe the fear of the unknown comes more from your play partner or their motivations. So if you have a partner who's wearing a mask or a full head-to-toe cosplay or costume or something, it becomes a lot harder to really understand who they are and what they're doing. You think you know them, but you don't really know this new persona they've taken on. They might not be willing to do certain things or have certain motivations for what they're doing, but this character they're playing instead, you don't really know them. Maybe the mask that they're wearing is obscuring their face and you can't really predict what they're thinking or what they're going to do next because you don't have that usual, more reliable indicator of nonverbal communication you've previously come to rely on during your other scenes. And maybe when it comes to motivations, you don't understand why you're being captured or tied up or being punished. And when you don't know why those things are happening, your brain is going to start racing and wondering, okay, what the heck is going on here? So with the unknown, this plays both very well with the more acute form of fear, like, oh my gosh, what's suddenly happening here? And also with that slower, more dread-filled form of fear, where it's like, okay, this is slowly getting worse and worse. What's really happening? I don't quite understand and I'm not getting the full picture. But moving on, loss of control is another very important factor with fear play. This can be a great tool for bringing out a sense of fear, either with total loss of control with something like mummification or using a vac bed, where they can't help anything that happens to them next because they have no ability to prevent anything from happening to them or to cause things to happen. The other option here is to have a choice between two bad choices where they simply can't win, as in the example of predicament bondage I gave earlier, where you have to either choose this bad thing or this bad thing. And being lost in that moment where nothing you do seems to matter or be effectual or anything that happens is going to be bad, that definitely creates a sensation of fear. But our last thing to consider here would be the creation and use of blank space. And this goes along very closely with the fear of the unknown. And I would say the main difference I see between these two different components is the unknown is when you have no information at all. You don't know what's happening whatsoever in that particular area. Whereas with the use of blank space, you cause the mind to wander and fill in the gaps between two known facts. So for example here, maybe you know that your partner has a pet snake in their house. Okay, fact one. Fact two, maybe possibly, is you think you saw a snake slithering along the ground as you entered into their house before they blindfolded you and tossed you away in the cupboard. Now, what's your mind going to think next? Okay, their snake might seem to be out of the house, and oh my gosh, what's that on my back? Is that a cold, wet, slimy thing? Ah, could that be the snake? Your brain is going to come up with things to fill in the information gaps based on what it already knows. And using this to your advantage can help you create scenarios where you are doing something you wouldn't actually normally do for real, but it ends up feeling very real because your brain assumes it can't possibly be anything else other than what it is assuming is happening. Even if you're pretty sure your partner wouldn't suddenly have their snake crawl up your body while you're blindfolded in a closet, you can't necessarily be totally sure because you can't actually use your senses to verify that information or not. So those are the components I would think about carefully when it comes to understanding how you are going to create fear. Another thing that is definitely worth considering here too is whether or not the environment is going to be used to create fear or the partner is going to be used to create fear, because those are two very different scenarios. It's one thing to have your partner be the source of the fear, and something very different for your partner to be possibly even your savior, but for the environment to be the source of where the fear is coming from. You can create very different dynamics with this, where your partner is your captor and is torturing you, to where your partner is the white knight who wants to be able to save you, but they can't until you complete this one impossible task, you know? So also consider that too, because for some people, having their partner be the source of the fear is the thing that makes all this fear play stuff work. Whereas for other people, they don't want to associate their partner as being the source of the fear, but they want their partner to help, I guess, create the fear play scene with them, even though they may not be the captor who is torturing them directly. They want to help them, they want to save them, but they can't because, oh no, whatever reason, until they can sweep in at the last moment and help you out, save you, be your white knight, for example. But moving on, I think something else to definitely think about here is factoring in personal fear points. I know many people in the kink scene who love lizards and reptiles, and they have scorpions and spiders, and for them, they think a snake is the cutest thing on planet Earth. They love those little danger noodles so much, and if you were to drop a snake in their lap, fake or not, in the middle of a scene, they wouldn't care at all. They wouldn't be scared in the least. They would love it. They'd be like, oh my gosh, snake cuddle time, yay. So when it comes to creating your fear play scene, you have to be very clear about what your partner individually is afraid of or not. And also set up very clear boundaries around that. If you're engaging in fear play, you should be talking in detail, and also, I think, ranking what your fears are, putting context behind them. Everything from like, you know, oh, this is kind of just like a mild ick, all the way over to like, this is my greatest fear of all time. And be very clear about what areas of fear you are comfortable exploring or not. If you only really want to do the fears that are like a 1 to 10 out to like a 4 out of 10 for you, and you want to stay away from anything that's a greater fear than that, that is perfectly valid and reasonable. Other people, their goal is always to get to the 10 out of 10 fear, and they don't really like playing around in the kind of simple stuff, but it's very, very individual, and it should be something you negotiate about thoroughly. And I want to make a clear note here as well about silly fears and silly phobias. A lot of us can't help what we're afraid of. I know people that are afraid of pickles and chickens and like the one type of sound that a certain car makes or something. And you know, our brains are funny, okay? If you're negotiating with somebody and they say, hey, I have a phobia of pickles, I don't want to be around pickles, that is not an opportunity to be like, oh my gosh, that's so silly. How could you be afraid of pickles? That's so bizarre. You know, how dare you basically have such a weird fear. That's not an invitation to be like, I'm not going to take this seriously because of how silly this fear personally is to me. That does not mean you have permission, especially if they ever say otherwise, to like suddenly bring out a pickle in the middle of a scene, or heaven forbid during aftercare because it's just a joke. How serious could a fear of pickles actually possibly be? Like, You don't get to be the arbiter of if somebody's fears or phobias get respected or not. You have to listen to your partner, and if you can't listen to your partner and follow those boundaries because you personally think they're too silly to be respected, really shouldn't be doing fear play or probably BDSM at all, in my opinion. So anyways, moving on from that, I want to say if you are new to fear play, and you're new to BDSM in general for that matter, I would definitely stay in the more tepid waters versus going all the way into the deep end. I would stay far away from any kind of phobias, and by phobias I mean like clinical phobias here. Anything that's maybe more intense, like a 4 out of 10 on the fear scale, I would also stay away from. Like, you want to slowly work your way up to that. I would say use fun as a way to play with fear. Don't have it only just be fear. Pair with other things you know you enjoy and you find fun to do with your partner. Go to a haunted house, watch a scary movie together. If you're in private, maybe have a collar and leash on and they can tug you gently and whisper in your ear, you know, all the horrible things they're gonna do to you after you watch the movie, or how intriguing it might be to do what they're doing on screen to you in real life. You know, have it be a little bit more of like a tantalizing teasing back and forth, or do fearful things with your partner, but have it be where they are your protector and your savior instead of being your captor and your tormentor. And as you do start to explore more of those fears and you start to do scenes where maybe you, for example, have a knife out on the countertop nearby and you never even use it during the scene, I recommend counterbalancing the fear play with tons of praise afterwards. The praise is the watermelon to the fear's salt, maybe, let's say. So if you're doing that knife play scene and you have the knife over there in the corner, maybe you're doing something else in the main component of the scene, let's say, like you're doing a flogging or an over-the-knee spanking or something, but the knife is in very clear view for your partner. It's like a prop knife, you know, nothing too serious, nothing like actually risky. Maybe at some point during the scene, you bring it up to their face and you say, "What's this? This is a knife, isn't it? Imagine all of the terrible things I could do with this." And maybe you run your hand against the length of the blade and you kind of like toy around with it a little bit, and then you put it back down, leaving it very clearly in their field of view. You don't ever use it, you don't ever have it be more than just like a vague threat, but the knife is there. And your partner, who is afraid of knives, has to sit with that fear of like, well, but maybe they end up really doing something with this. That dread creeps in. Then afterwards, you resolve the fear with tons of praise, right? You're like, "Oh my gosh, you're so amazing, you're so brave. Look at how well you handled that knife being there. I'm so proud of you. Oh my gosh, you're the best, you're so wonderful." Lots of kisses and hugs and cuddles and snuggles and all of that good stuff to go along with your praise king. I think that's a good way to explore to start with. But as you build your confidence and your trust in each other doing these types of scenes, you can then move into those deeper waters I mentioned. And there are many different ways to get into those deeper waters. For example, you could decide you want to do phobia exposure therapy with your partner a la Fear Factor. And I wouldn't generally recommend doing that with a full-on actual clinical phobia unless you have a really good support system, other mental health providers helping you out, not just relying on your partner to be your mental health provider here. Like, come on now, kink can be therapeutic, but it's not therapy, as we usually say here on this channel. So be aware of that. It can be a tool, but it should be a cautiously used tool at that, understanding its dangers and its limitations. You can also do things like consensual non-consent or interrogation play, both of which tend to be huge draws and tools within fear play. Both of these can take months and months of work to build up to, and especially with the case of CNC, you can develop a whole DS dynamic that is based off a consensual non-consent fear play dynamic. I have seen more than 1 or 2 couples that have this as their primary style and motivation for a dom-sub relationship. There's even activities that combine a high level of trust, risk, and fear together to create some very intense sensations. Things like choking or holding your partner's head underwater until they pinch you to stop, for example. Those can all be intense, but they are very dangerous and should be proceeded into cautiously. And because this is a 101 video, I'm not going to get into the more extreme areas of edge play here with fear play, but do know that they do exist. And if you want to get into those, I would always recommend further research, further reading, further classes. Make sure you have a good knowledge base first before you get into the wide and wacky world of fear play. So with that being said, that is everything I have to say today about fear play. I would love to know your thoughts in a comment down below. Do you enjoy fear play? How do you incorporate it into your relationship or into scenes? I would love to hear all your thoughts and contributions in a comment down below. If you did enjoy this and you've not already, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of different kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best way you can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.